Alright, welcome back everybody. All four of you that do end up watching my channel may have noticed I was gone last week. I did not post. I do apologize for that. Uh, Week one for the Green Bay Packers was an ugly loss in Minnesota. All you really need to know for that game was that the Packers offense really couldn't do anything. The Vikings defense looked better than it probably was. And yeah, no Al Nazar did not help. The receiving core was pretty thin, and the defense did not play up to its potential. But that's last week. I'm going to talk about this week when the Chicago Bears traveled to Green Bay to take on the Packers, and the game just got done. This is actually probably the quickest I've been to make a reaction video, but besides the point. The Green Bay Packers defeated the Chicago Bears 27 to 10. As I always do, I'm just going to run through the stats and then a couple of my notes and then look forward to the next game, following kind of the same formula I did last year. So before I keep babbling anymore, I'm just going to jump right into it. Of course, starting with the Green Bay Packers stats, Aaron Rodgers threw the ball 25 times, completing 19 passes for 234 yards and 2 touchdowns. The leading rusher for Green Bay was Aaron Jones. He ran the ball 15 times for 132 yards. He had one rushing touchdown, and then he also caught the ball 3 times for 38 yards and had a receiving touchdown. So in total, he had, quick math here, 170 scrimmage yards with 2 total touchdowns. And then A.J. Dillon also had a pretty decent game. He had 18 carries for 61 yards. And then on the receiving side of things, Sammy Watkins was a leading receiver for Green Bay. He had 3 receptions for 93 yards. And then defensively, no one really stood out. Rashawn Gary, I thought, had a pretty good game. I think he was in on maybe a sack and a half. I didn't look too deeply at defensive stats. Pretty good all-around effort. Jair Alexander, he's the one guy I did pick. He had 3 tackles, and he did have the game-sealing interception. Yeah, that's it for the Packers. For the Chicago Bears, Justin Fields, he was contained pretty well today. Green Bay defense did a pretty good job containing him. He threw the ball 11 times, completing 7 passes for 70 yards. He had no passing touchdowns. He had 1 interception, and then he did rush for 1 touchdown. So he had 1 rush touchdown, no passing touchdowns, and 1 interception. The leading rusher, excuse me, for the Chicago Bears was David Montgomery. He ran the ball 15 times for 122 yards, and the Chicago Bears' leading receiver was former Green Bay Packer Equanimeous St. Brown. He had 2 receptions for 39 yards. Looking at some of the notes I have for this game, starting with some of the things that the Packers did well, is they ran the ball well. Obviously, I mentioned Aaron Jones. He had 132 yards rushing on the ground, and then A.J. Dillon added 61 yards as well. And then the Packers got back Elton Jenkins and John Runyon Jr. Those 2 guys, getting them back on the offensive line definitely helped get a good run block and opened up lanes for Jones and Dillon to run through. Especially in the second half. The first half was still pretty decent, but especially in the second half, as I was watching the game, Aaron Jones was getting like 8 to 10 yards a rush. A.J. Dillon was getting 4 or 5. So definitely good to have those guys back. Hopefully David Bakhtiari can come back before next week's game. Next week is a pretty big one. I will get to that. But yeah, the first thing the Packers did well is that they ran the ball pretty well, especially in that second half. And then on the defensive side of things, other than the first drive in which they allowed a touchdown, the defense played pretty well. It was pretty solid all around. Like I said, they contained Justin Fields to just 70 yards passing. They did allow David Montgomery to get 122 yards, but no touchdowns there. So not great, but he didn't score. Not all that worried about it, but something to keep an eye on for the future. And then on the special teams side of thing, there was no major special teams mistakes. Amari Rodgers did muffled a, I believe it was a punt return, but he was able to recover his own fumble. So not something you want to see, especially on a team like the Green Bay Packers that have had special teams issues for multiple years in a row now. But other than that one mistake in which he was able to recover, there were no major mistakes. The kickoff return did a really good job. The Chicago Bears didn't really make it past the 20 or the 25 very often. In fact, I don't think they did, or if they did, it was only once. So yeah, kickoff return coverage was really good, and then punts, again, not a major issue there. And now getting into some of the things I saw that were issues. Fumbles were an issue. I believe the Green Bay Packers fumbled the ball twice, if not three times. They were able to recover one or two of those, but they did lose the ball. I think they lost the ball twice out of three fumbles. Part of that was due to timing. There was a play where I believe it was Christian Watson was running in motion from right to left, and he was either too early, the snap was too early, or he was too late. Not exactly sure what happened there, but the snap hit Christian Watson and ended up being a fumble. I believe that was the one that Green Bay did recover, but it was a pretty bad loss of yards. And then the second one was a misdirection run. I believe it was Rodgers. He got the snap, and then he was trying to hand it off to AJ Dillon. And I don't know if there was a miscommunication between Rodgers and Dillon, or if Dillon cut the wrong way, or Rodgers stayed in place for too long. Again, I'm not exactly sure what happened, but Dillon ended up running into Rodgers and fumbling the ball. I believe that was the one that they lost and was a turnover on. So definitely something that you want to look to fix going forward next week into a little bit more serious of a game. And then another thing, I know I said the defense played pretty well. However, I did notice at times the run defense was shaky. I believe it was the fourth quarter where David Montgomery got a majority of his yards. There were two plays back to back where they got 28 yards and 27 yards, both on rush plays. So, yeah, they did pretty good for the first three quarters. And then in the fourth quarter, on one drive specifically, the Packers defense just kind of let the Bears run all over them. The drive did not end up being a touchdown. I think that was the one where they kicked a field goal on. Was not great to see, but it was only one drive, so I don't want to read too much into it, but something to keep an eye on for sure. Let's see, where was that? Yeah, like I said, my quote little note that I have here was that the defense overall played pretty well, and they kind of played to that phrase that you may or may not hear of bend, don't break. So you can give a bunch of yards and you can give up field goals all you want. As long as you don't allow the other team to score touchdowns as much, then you can probably get by with it. At least that's kind of what I heard. But overall, for the Packers in this game, the offense looked much better with Allen Lazard back and getting those two linemen back as well. Much better rush or run blocking, and Aaron Rodgers kind of was able to spread the ball around a little bit more. He had a little bit more time to get those proper reads. Yeah, it was just a better game overall than week one. Looking forward to next week, the Green Bay Packers will travel to Tampa Bay to take on the Buccaneers, and that is a 3:25 game, as it should be. Should be a great game between Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers. Obviously, they don't play each other necessarily, but their teams play each other, and it's always must-see television. And so my keys to that game are: you have to play mistake-free football. You have to limit the penalties. Obviously, you want none, but they're a part of the game. Limit the penalties, and you cannot turn the ball over. Especially, you cannot give the ball to Tom Brady more times than you want to. So no turnovers and limit the penalties. That is like the basic bare bones minimum. That's what every coach in the NFL is going to say. Don't turn the ball over. Don't commit penalties. That's just shooting yourself in the foot, so to speak. The next thing, again, this is probably a pretty common thing, is you have to establish a run game to control that clock. You have to be able to wear down that Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, because it is still a great defense. I don't think they've lost a lot of pieces in the past 2 years. I don't think there's any rookies or second-year players that they drafted. They've just been able to keep a pretty solid defense, and they did a great job today. I believe they forced 5 turnovers against New Orleans Saints. So yeah, you have to be able to establish the run and control that clock and wear down that Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. Control time of possession, wear them down with the run, establish a play action, so on and so forth. Every other sports commentator is probably going to say these two things that I just said. And then one thing for me personally, and probably other analysts and professionals will notice for next week is you have to be able to mix up defensive packages. Now, Joe Barry likes to play more of a zone scheme, kind of like a zone blitz, excuse me, and not even really a zone blitz. He'll play four down linemen, or like Kenny Clark and Jaron Reed, and then they'll have Preston Smith and Rashawn Gary on the outside and those edge positions, and then they'll just kind of sit back and play a zone. Well, Tom Brady's going to be able to pick that apart and just keep throwing 5 yard checkdowns on out routes to whoever, and they'll just kind of keep nipping away at the Packers defense. And we cannot allow that to happen. We have Jair Alexander, Rasul Douglas, and Eric Stokes, three excellent corners, and you have Adrian Amos and Darnell Savage as safeties as well. They're also a pretty solid tandem in the secondary. So you have to be able to mix up zone and man coverage packages. You have to do your best to confuse Tom Brady. Now, he's been in the league. I think this is like his 23rd year, so 22nd at least. So he's pretty smart. He'll be able to read some of that, but at least try your best to confuse Tom Brady. Show blitz and then back off or anything like that. Try to, mix it up a bit. You cannot play one-dimensional defense against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and especially against Tom Brady. And yeah, going off of that, be able to get pressure and play man coverage more. Like I said, to reiterate my point that I made, you have a great secondary. Allow them to play man-on-man coverage. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers do have Chris Godwin, who I think is out, but they do still have Mike Evans, who is a great wide receiver. So, yeah, play man coverage, mix up the schemes a little bit, and yeah, that's pretty much all I have as notes going into that game. But yeah, Packers get a win. They're 1-1, so back to 500. Hopefully, they can keep this positive momentum going as they head down to Tampa Bay next week to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But as always, we'll wait and see what happens. And most importantly, go Pack, go!